What if I told you the anthem that sounded like pure American freedom was written by two men who'd spent a decade sleeping in vans? A guitarist put on stage at age 3 by his grandfather, a man who walked away from Lynyrd Skynyrd to build his own dream. Highway Song conquered FM radio and filled arenas. Then the machine that made them famous fractured the very brotherhood that forged it. This is the rise and fall of Blackfoot. It started, as so many Southern rock stories do, in Jacksonville, Florida, a city that had become the unlikely forge of a generation's sound. By the late 1960s, Jacksonville wasn't just producing musicians. It was producing a philosophy: work hard, stay loyal, play until your fingers bleed. And when the world tells you to quit, play louder. Ricky Medlocke was born into that world the only way you could be, from the inside. Born Ricky Lynn Green on February 17, 1950, he was raised by his maternal grandparents, Paul "Shorty" Medlocke and his wife Ruby. Shorty wasn't just a grandfather, he was a bluegrass and Delta blues musician of genuine repute. And from the moment Ricky could stand, music wasn't a hobby in that household. It was the air they breathed. Shorty handed Ricky a miniature banjo and put him on stage at age 3. By age 8, Ricky was drumming in Shorty's band. By his teenage years, he had mastered the banjo, guitar, drums, mandolin, and keyboards. This wasn't a music lesson, this was an education in soul. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. That foundation gave Medlocke something rare, the dual energy of a frontman who thought like a rhythm player. He didn't just play the guitar, he commanded the stage with the instinct of a man who had spent years holding the groove from behind the kit. That combination would eventually define everything Blackfoot became. Medlocke's first professional outfit was called Fresh Garbage, a nod to the California band spirit, and it quickly evolved into a harder unit called Hammer. Bass player Greg T. Walker and guitarist Charlie Hargret were the core, and when drummer Jackson Spires joined the fold, the chemistry snapped into place. It was Spires who suggested the name Blackfoot, drawn from the Native American heritage he and Medlocke both shared. That identity ran deeper than a band name, but Jacksonville in those years had a gravitational center, and that center was Lynyrd Skynyrd. In 1971, Ronnie Van Zant reached out to Medlocke to fill the drum throne. For a brief but pivotal period stretching from 1971 into 1972, Medlocke was Skynyrd's drummer and occasional vocalist, recording tracks that would later surface on Skynyrd's First and Last. Songs like One More Time and Preacher's Daughter carried his fingerprints. But restless ambition had other plans. Medlocke didn't believe he was a great enough drummer for the direction Skynyrd was taking. More truthfully, he wanted to be at the front of the stage, a guitar in his hands and the crowd in his sights. In 1972, he made the fateful call. He walked away from the relative safety of Skynyrd and reformed Blackfoot with Spires, Walker, and Hargret. That was the moment the dream became real, and the hard part began. The years between 1972 and 1978 were a slow, grinding education in survival. Blackfoot released 2 albums, No Reservations in 1975 and Flyin' High in 1976, to virtually no commercial response. The industry saw them as another Southern rock band in a market that was already drowning in twang and twin guitars. The Allman Brothers had the jazz complexity, Lynyrd Skynyrd had the anthems. Where did Blackfoot fit? They answered that question the same way every night, on stage. They were relentless road warriors, playing hundreds of shows a year in roadhouses and clubs where the threat of violence from the crowd was as real as the heat. There was no safety net, no record label pushing them, no radio support waiting around the corner. That shared struggle created something that couldn't be manufactured in a studio. It created trust, the kind of trust where you know, without a word spoken, that the man next to you is going to deliver every single night. Walker, Hargret, Spires, and Medlocke weren't just bandmates. They were brothers built by miles. They were waiting for the spark. And in 1978, it finally arrived. The turning point arrived with a manager named Al Nolly, operating out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, the same gritty city that had birthed Iggy Pop and the Stooges. Nolly understood something fundamental about Blackfoot that previous industry contacts had missed. Their power wasn't on a polished studio record. Their power was raw, combustible, and utterly live. The solution was simple: capture it that way. Working with Nally in Michigan, the band produced Strikes, an album that would redefine Southern rock for the dawn of the 1980s. Released on March 7, 1979, it was the definition of a 10-year overnight success. Everything they had sacrificed, every mile they had logged, every night they had played to half-empty bars, it had all been pointing here. The album carried 2 songs that would anchor their legacy permanently. The first was Train Train, a gift from the past, written by Ricky's grandfather, Shorty Medlocke. It opened with Shorty's lonesome bluegrass harmonica, a sound as old as the South itself, before Blackfoot's muscle kicked it into overdrive. That detail wasn't lost on fans. This wasn't a band chasing trends. This was a band honoring where they came from. Train Train climbed into the top 40 of the Billboard Hot 100, but it was the other song that became the anthem. Highway Song was co-written by Medlocke and Jackson Spires, born out of the tens of thousands of miles the 2 men had shared in the back of a van. It was about freedom. It was about the road as a way of life, not just a means to an end. It represented possibility, independence, and the promise that the next town might be the one where everything finally clicked. The song's structure was deceptively elegant. It began as a melodic ballad before it accelerated into a high-octane guitar exploration. Many fans at the time would argue it rivaled even Freebird as the definitive Southern rock road anthem. For the listeners who heard it on late-night FM radio in the summer of 1979, it wasn't just a song. It was a feeling they recognized in their bones. Highway Song climbed into the upper reaches of the Billboard Hot 100. Strikes itself cracked the top 50 on the Billboard 200 and achieved gold certification on January 23, 1980. The album would eventually reach platinum status in the mid-1980s. For a band that had been told for nearly a decade that they didn't fit, that the market was too crowded, that they sounded too heavy, that nobody was interested, the arrival of Strikes felt like vindication written in gold. The Jacksonville kids had finally been heard. Success, when it finally arrives after a decade of struggle, doesn't feel like relief. It feels like acceleration. Blackfoot didn't slow down after Strikes. They sped up. The touring machine that had been grinding through bars and roadhouses shifted into arena gear, and suddenly Blackfoot was sharing stages with bands whose names had been on the radio for years. They opened arena shows for giants like The Who, including massive domes that put them in front of tens of thousands of people at a time. They toured extensively with Rush. They went out with AC/DC, a pairing that felt almost inevitable. 2 bands who treated volume as a moral position. For an audience that remembered this era, the combination of AC/DC's British Thunder and Blackfoot's Southern Grit on the same bill was a statement about where rock and roll lived in 1980 and 1981. Blackfoot followed Strikes with Tomcat in 1980 and Marauder in 1981. Marauder, in particular, was cited by Medlocke himself as one of the band's finest achievements, a harder, more polished record that reflected the influence of their time touring with British heavyweights like the Scorpions. It landed in the top half of the Billboard 200 and demonstrated that the band wasn't content to simply recreate what had worked before. They were pushing forward. The European market had taken serious notice. British and continental rock audiences embraced Blackfoot with a fervor that matched or exceeded the American response. In August 1980, they appeared at the Reading Festival in England, cementing their reputation as a ferocious live unit in front of one of rock's most discerning crowds. The culmination of that European connection was Highway Song Live, recorded during their UK tour in 1982. It stood as a high watermark, a live document that captured the full weight of what Blackfoot had become, the classic lineup, locked into a groove that had been forged over 10 years of road work, delivering for audiences who had no idea how much had gone into making it look effortless. These weren't pretty boys from Los Angeles. These weren't British rock gods with art school degrees. These were working-class Southern musicians who had built something real with their hands, and seeing that reflected back from sold-out arenas felt personal in a way that no manufactured star ever could. But even then, even in those moments of thunder and triumph, the 1970s were closing. The golden era of Southern rock was entering its last act. The audience that had been the beating heart of the movement was getting older, and a new sound was rising, one that had little use for twin guitars and the philosophy of the road. The machine was still running, but something in the fuel had changed. MTV launched on August 1st, 1981. For some bands, it was an opportunity. For Blackfoot, it was the beginning of an existential crisis that played out over the next 3 years in slow, painful increments. The music industry pivoted almost overnight toward visual image and radio-friendly pop hooks. Synth-driven new wave acts dominated the conversation. Hair metal was rising, trading the authenticity of Southern rock for lacquered production and telegenic frontmen. Program directors at radio stations began looking for something shinier, something that looked as good on a television screen as it sounded through a speaker. Blackfoot's label felt the pressure immediately and passed it directly down to the band. There were conversations about modernizing, about broadening the sound, about being relevant to the new decade rather than the last one. For a band built on the twin guitar Southern rock ethos of Ricky Medlocke and Charlie Hargret, those conversations were profoundly uncomfortable. The first major decision came in 1982. Blackfoot added keyboards to their lineup, recruiting Ken Hensley, a gifted player who had spent years with British rock institution Uriah Heep. On paper, it made sense. Hensley was a respected craftsman, and his presence gave the band a wider sonic palette. But in practice, his arrival shifted the band's center of gravity. The guitar-heavy, road-tested power that had defined Strikes and Marauder began to give way to something that felt, to longtime fans, like a concession rather than an evolution. The commercial results told the story clearly. Siogo, released in 1983, charted far lower on the Billboard 200 than Marauder had, a significant drop that the hardcore audience felt immediately. The new audience their label was chasing never materialized. It was a transition that satisfied nobody. The breaking point came during the recording of Vertical Smiles in 1984. The sessions were tense and fractured, with disagreements over creative direction erupting into something uglier and more permanent. Charlie Hargret, the guitarist who had been at Medlocke's side for 14 years, from the days of Hammer and Fresh Garbage, through every van ride and bar fight and sold-out arena, walked away. The album's liner notes acknowledged his departure with a line thanking him for 14 years of agony and dedication. It was poignant and bitter in equal measure. Vertical Smiles barely registered on the Billboard 200. The collapse was nearly complete. The brotherhood that had once seemed unbreakable was splintering. The defining guitar sound had been diluted by synthesizers, and the fractured legacy that the band's name now carries was beginning to take its first, terrible shape. By the early 1990s, Ricky Medlocke was continuing to tour under the Blackfoot name with rotating lineups, but what he was leading bore little resemblance to the unit that had conquered arenas a decade earlier. The magic of the original 4 members was gone. The music survived, but the brotherhood that had made it didn't. Medlocke reached a point of profound disillusionment. He later reflected that during this period, he considered leaving the music industry entirely, walking away from the road that had defined his life since childhood, and pursuing something as far from rock and roll as possible. Fishing, boating, anything that didn't carry the weight of what Blackfoot had been and what it had become. Then, in 1996, the phone rang. Gary Rossington, a founding member of Lynyrd Skynyrd, was on the line. The band that had once briefly employed Medlocke as a drummer was now asking him back, not as a drummer, but as a lead guitarist and primary songwriter. For Medlocke, it was a return to his roots that offered the stability, the respect, and the platform that Blackfoot's later years had failed to provide. He accepted. The departure was understandable. It was also the final fracture. With Medlocke now a full member of one of Southern rock's most enduring institutions, the Blackfoot name entered a state of suspended animation. In 2004, Jackson Spires, Greg Walker, and Charlie Hargret attempted to reclaim it, reforming as Blackfoot with Medlocke's initial blessing, but without his presence. For many fans, this version carried something real. 3 of the 4 original members still playing the songs that had mattered, but tragedy arrived quickly. Jackson Spires, the drummer who had given the band its name and co-written Highway Song, passed away in 2005. The reunion that had offered a brief flicker of restoration was extinguished almost as soon as it had begun. Walker and Hargret continued under different names: Warrior's Pride, Two Wolf, carrying the spirit of the original lineup without the brand. Meanwhile, Medlocke took a different approach. In 2012, he relaunched Blackfoot entirely, with a younger lineup of musicians he personally produced and managed, modeling the new unit on the high-energy shows of the early 1980s. 2 versions of the same legacy, neither quite whole. Today, the name Blackfoot exists, but it serves as a kind of philosophical test for anyone who cares deeply about rock and roll authenticity. Ricky Medlocke owns the trademark. The version he relaunched in 2012 features younger musicians who play the classic catalog with genuine energy and professionalism. By any technical measure, it is the official Blackfoot. But for a generation of fans who grew up believing that a band was defined by the men who bled for it, the question of what makes a band that band has never been fully resolved. The surviving original members who built those songs from nothing, who drove through the night for gigs that paid $50, who forged the brotherhood that made Highway Song possible, they are now playing under names most casual fans have never heard. That disconnect between the brand and the men who created it is the open wound at the center of the Blackfoot story. And yet, when the opening notes of Highway Song come through the speakers of a classic rock radio station, none of that complexity is present. There is only the riff. There is only the road. There is only the feeling that in the summer of 1979, 4 men from Jacksonville captured something true about what it meant to be free in America and committed it to tape forever. That song remains a staple on classic rock radio decades after its release. It has outlived the unity of the men who made it, the manager who helped bring it to life, and one of the 2 men who wrote it. It keeps playing, long after everything else has changed. Highway Song isn't just a song from the past. It's a reminder that the things that were built with sweat and loyalty and miles of Southern highway don't disappear, even when the men who built them go their separate ways. The road split the band, but the music refuses to end. Blackfoot proved that brotherhood can survive almost anything, except success on someone else's terms. They built something real from nothing, conquered arenas on pure grit, and left a song on the radio that still sounds like freedom today. But the road that made them legends eventually pulled them in directions that no amount of loyalty could bridge. What's your memory of Blackfoot? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from rock's greatest era.